everyone, and welcome to the Science of Reading and Multilingual Learners, Effective Literacy Instructional Materials for Multilingual Learners, Part 3. We are so excited to have you. I wanted to start, by popular demand, we had some requests to hear a little bit more about what ELSF does, our mission and all of those pieces. And so I wanted to share a little bit about who we are and what we are about. We ultimately are about equity and access to quality education. All of our students deserve it, and English learners are no different. And so we are committed to supporting multilingual learners across this country. Specifically, we support and advocate for high-quality instructional materials that are inclusive of multilingual learners. And so for us, it really is all about equity and access. And so some of the ways that we do that are we really create actionable pathways for content developers to enact high-quality instructional materials for multilingual learners. And really what we mean by that is we support content developers in reviewing and designing their instructional materials in a way that is inclusive of multilingual learners. And on the other end, we support states and large districts in selecting quality materials that support our multilingual learners. And so wanted to share a little bit about some of the ways that we do that. So we do review materials here at English Learner Success Forum. We have lots of services and supports that we partner that include a snapshot review of materials, which is a quick way to see whether your materials are meeting the mark to support our multilingual learners. We can get even more deeper in that work with our deep dives. And if you're in the early stages of designing a product, we can support with that as well. If you want to look across all types of portfolios, science, ELA, math, we can also help in kind of supporting your strategic planning for new products. If you can go back a slide. On the adoption and so if you're a state or a district on that end, we can help with thinking about how you run inclusive adoptions and kind of take a look at the way that you run your adoption processes to make sure that they support multilingual learners. We also can do that once you've actually adopted those high quality instructional materials to make sure that that implementation process is equitable for all students, particularly multilingual learners. And so we have lots of options here on how to do that. So we wanted to just quickly share that before we dove into the meat and potatoes of today's session. If you are interested in connecting with us, please let us know. You can email me at lbravo@elsuccessforum.org, and we will have that in the chat as well. All right, thank you. And I will kick it over to Deborah.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to session 3 of our series. And actually, as you can see here, it says we're going to have 4 sessions, but we've just added a 5th, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that at the end of this session today. But today we focus squarely on our extra special guest speaker, Dr. Lily Wong Fillmore. And so, you know, up front, Dr. Fillmore has very kindly provided virtually all of her content right on her slides. So you can actually relax and engage with and interact with the material without having to worry about taking a lot of notes. At the end of the session, there's going to be an opportunity for you to take a brief survey. And when you complete that survey, you will automatically receive the session resources, including a PDF of the slides and a link to recordings of all the previous sessions. So next slide. We absolutely invite you to interact with us. Please comment and react using the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. And if you have a question for Dr. Fillmore, please submit it using the Q&A feature. We're going to be gathering your questions so that Dr. Fillmore can address as many as possible at the end of her remarks. And so now to introduce today's speaker. Dr. Lily Wong Fillmore is Professor Emerita at the University of California, Berkeley, and a longtime champion for multilingual learners and their teachers. She has been called an activist scholar, a stellar mentor with jaw-dropping reserves of energy, a powerhouse, and an inspiration to countless aspiring educators of multilingual learners. She has supported migrant workers in Central California. She's worked toward revitalizing vanishing native languages with the Acoma Pueblo, and she has supported the Yupik children living in villages alongside Alaska's Yukon River, children who she found to be crackly bright. Those of you who know Dr. Fillmore know that she is absolutely tireless in her advocacy. She was recognized by Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona as a trailblazer for equity. It is an absolute honor to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Lily Wong Fillmore.
Hi, everyone. Can we get the next slide? So I'm going to be talking about effective materials today. What might that look like? What would it take? Right. So I listened to the earlier speakers talking about what is needed, and if only I could advance this slide, you would know that I heard what state and district leaders said their schools and teachers need, and what literacy researchers and leaders said are critical considerations in instructional reform. So from the state and local education leaders, we learned that science of reading is widely accepted as an instructional imperative. The leaders we heard from had generous versions of science of reading in mind, rather than sparse ones that treat decoding skills as be-all, end-all of reading instruction. The question is how to address the instructional needs of multilingual learners under science of reading mandates. And there has been a big teacher turnover after the pandemic, which means that there are many new teachers who are inexperienced in working with multilingual learners. And there's also an expression of need for materials that work for the linguistically diverse kids in our schools, English learners, speakers of dialects, in other words, multilingual learners. There was also an expression of a need for engaging materials that support all learners, including English learners and multilingual learners. Such materials are hard to find, so many teachers have tried creating their own. We heard about the need for materials and professional development that provide guidance for teachers on how to support multilingual learners and to make instruction work for all students, not just for literacy, but across the curriculum. The literacy leaders and researchers reminded us about the multifaceted complexity of literacy instruction in our schools, given the many multilingual learners they serve. There are no easy fixes or solutions, yet, as we heard from Jim Cummins, a lot is known from research about what's involved and what's needed. There's a need for prior work on oral language development. If literacy is to be useful, what use is decoding if children don't understand what they are sounding out? Literacy is not an end in itself, but is instead a means. It provides a crucial way to access knowledge and information and to function in a world that requires literacy. Children's first languages are foundations to build on, as Rebecca Bloom Martinez reminds us. Prior first language literacy is a superpower that supports learning to read in a second language like English. When dual language and bilingual education is possible, starting literacy instruction in the first language is the way to go. So we heard about many needs, wants, and there were so many asks. We heard about the need for science of reading support, not the narrow, limited view of skills, but skills and knowledge that provide access to literacy and learning. We heard about the need for materials that work for all of the linguistically diverse kids in our schools, kids who are new to English, speakers of dialect, in short, multilingual learners, and about the need for instructional materials that provide guidance for teachers on how to support multilingual learners and to make the curriculum work for all students. A crucial aspect of literacy instruction is language, about which few teachers have much confidence, as Catherine Snow and I have argued. They especially need help and guidance in materials on how to work with it. So there's a lot for everyone to think about and to work on, especially educational leaders at all levels. Schools are under a lot of pressure from all sides to improve their performance in literacy instruction for all kids, but they can't do it alone. State and local education leaders must be clear and unequivocal in insisting that the other crucial players in educating kids are doing their parts too, but I will have more to say about their role in all of this. For institutions of higher education that train teachers, there's a huge need for well-educated K-6 teachers, all of whom, not just designated specialists, are prepared to work effectively with multilingual learners who abound in our schools. And for publishers who design and create literacy materials that are providing teachers the means and professional support for doing the big job they are expected to do with joy and success, I have more to say about the role they should play in all of this as well. Now, where power for change resides is in the state and local education agencies. They want rich and full-bodied English language arts materials that work for all students, including multilingual learners. What is no longer acceptable are instructional materials that treat multilingual learners as afterthoughts, their linguistic needs relegated to little boxes or labels in teacher editions that offer teachers tips on what to do with them depending on their language or learning levels. Your power lies in your adoption tools and processes. Multilingual learners must be front and center in your consideration of materials. Take some time to look at what works. If materials work only for some kids and not for virtually all, something is off. Just say no. Materials that call for sorting kids into levels for differentiated treatment must be looked at with extreme caution. It might be okay at stages in targeted foundational skills instruction, since kids can differ in how much practice they need at various stages. It is not okay for knowledge building or comprehension instruction. That's whole class instruction for everyone. And some thoughts here now for publishers and content developers. What we're hearing from state and local education leaders is an appeal for better and more inclusive English language arts materials for multilingual learners for all of the students in our schools. This is not about adding more suggestions and teacher editions on what to do about the multilingual learners in the class or setting them apart for work on lower level materials. Educators are letting us know that when it comes time to adopt new instructional materials, the programs that will rise to the top are the ones that build knowledge and support language and literacy development. And that means having rich and beautifully written texts of many sorts, literary texts that celebrate beautiful language and connected informational texts that build knowledge about the social and natural world. That's a lot, but isn't that what literacy instruction is all about? Now, at present, information or guidance deemed necessary or may be useful for teachers is provided in the form of text in the teacher's editions that come with curricular materials or in ancillary materials. What teachers do not want or find useful are teacher editions that are so bloated, hundreds and hundreds of pages of text to read, they would go blind trying, so no one tries. There's useful information tucked within, but often way too much to wade through to find it. What's needed are slim gem teacher guides that provide enough background and necessary support for each unit of instruction to teach the materials thoughtfully and enthusiastically, and which provide specific guidance on how to support language and literacy development using the beautifully written literary and informational texts included. What's helpful would be embedded QR codes that access short text explanations, examples, or TikTok length videos here and there that show teachers how things can be done. So there were many calls for PD from publishers, but publishers ordinarily provide some PD in schools that use their materials, but is not as much as desired or said to be needed. Some publishers have made real efforts to go over and beyond the usual PD and provide some of the training teachers need to teach reading and to work with multilingual students. But is it realistic for them to engage in teacher education? Is that what publishers are supposed to be doing? The job of publishers is to take adopted standards and content specifications for subject areas at different grade levels and design and create the most amazing and effective materials for teachers to deliver that content, building the skills kids are expected to learn, supporting their language development, and making them eager to learn more. And of course, support for teachers as needed, when needed, to ace and deliver that content. So what can I add? I'm just a retiree, a pensioner with time on her hands, thinking about what all this means for schools, teachers, kids, and publishers too. My studies of language learning and language in learning have taken me into many schools over the years, and I have learned a lot about teaching and learning by doing that. I have seen how inspired educators can work miracles, turning kids from all backgrounds, including those who are new to English, into excited, enthusiastic, and literate learners, and I've learned from those educators. I have been thinking about all of this for a while. In fact, ever since LSEF asked me to think about what we could say to publishers several years back. So I'd like to offer you an example of what a knowledge-building, science of reading friendly language and literacy curriculum might look like in terms of an instructional unit that I think would meet the specifications laid out by the experts and leaders we have heard from in this series. English learners and multilingual learners are not segregated for ESL or ELD here. I'd like to show in detail what kinds of specific guidance teachers need in order to give all students support for learning the language of literacy, and show you places where guidance and necessary background information that teachers might need and find helpful can be embedded, and suggest the forms that such advice information might take. And in the end, offer some maybe useful advice on how to develop materials like the ones needed. So if I were a teacher, what would I want a literacy curriculum help me do? I'd want it to help me teach content that is exciting, connected, interesting, and meaningful, and pull together materials kids would be interested in learning, supporting the magical integration of literature, music, art, science, culture, and history. What all kids should be getting in K-3, the transformative knowledge base for learning. Now, I can hear the yeah buts. Yeah, but what about foundational reading skills? How do literature, science, music, art, and history support ELD? And what about phonics? Where and how do phonics happen? But of course, instruction for foundational skills, as Meredith Lieben argued, would be a part of such a curriculum, and you will see that language development for multilingual learners and everyone else is a major feature. The fact is, it is devilishly difficult to teach language and literacy skills detached from meaningful content and communication. Children are good sports. They will go along with instructional activities that are meant to teach skills, strategies, and abstractions. But what they get from such experiences is neither lasting nor transferable. As Sue Pimentel points out, what all children want, including English learners and multilingual learners, is interesting content. They want to learn about the world, ideas, events, how things relate, and to be able to talk and write about what they make of their observations and experiences. So let's look at an exercise in curricular design. This would be a second grade unit, an English language arts unit augmented with social studies, life sciences, and music. There would be legends, fables, folk tales from diverse cultures, and so forth, dealing with the myth of the wolf as a dangerous and savage beast. And it would deal with the historic battle between man and wolf in many parts of the world with the spread of farming and ranching, ultimately dealing with wolves as apex predators in healthy ecosystems. Such a curricular unit would afford children opportunities to learn about the structure and symbols in traditional folk tales and familiar children's stories about, and discover the ways in which they reflect the cultural and social history of various groups of peoples, and invite children to examine and look for the origin of folk beliefs, assumptions, and truisms that are seldom questioned, as well as give them opportunities to learn about the necessity of balance in healthy ecosystems and the roles played by animals in its maintenance, and create opportunities for children to learn about recent efforts to reintroduce apex or keystone predators to restore health to an ecosystem that has been damaged by their absence. So there would be stories, texts about home builders experimenting with eco-friendly materials. Now there are gazillions of such versions of these tales. Pick ones with the most beautiful language Now, why more than one item covering the same content and story? You might say, well, this is kind of a simple tale, but each book becomes background for the ones that follow. And there is a story and vocabulary buildup of stores of knowledge that facilitate understanding and access for language. Select ones for read alouds, ones that children can read themselves. And of course, then there would be another series, cautionary tales about sharing too much information with slick strangers. So another series with the wolf in play as villain. Again, the most beautifully written, complexly told versions. The questions to be raised in discussions and around read alouds is, what does the wolf symbolize? What do we know about wolves? How did they get such a bad reputation? And who speaks for wolf? A different perspective from Native America on wolves. The theme is the need to live with and to respect nature, told in beautiful verse and prose. And then there's the Grimm brothers, Peter and the Wolf. The Grimm brothers were inspired by an old Russian folk tale, and their version of Peter and the Wolf have evoked many retellings. Prokofiev was inspired to write a symphonic fairy tale for kids with a far more humane ending for the wolf than augured by the Grimms. I tried to embed, by the way, a little of the music in here, but I couldn't make it work without playing in every slide after this. My favorite version is a 1986 out-of-print Knopf publication and recording of the music by the Hamburg Symphony, but there are many recent recordings and books. A tip to publishers: hunt down that out-of-print 1986 Knopf edition and get the rights to reissue the book and recording. By the way, you can find it on Amazon, and you can just Google it. And this tells the story against the backdrop of Prokofiev's symphonic score, and it's just downright magical. So the question is, how did wolves come to be seen as beasts of waste and desolation? So here's a teacher read aloud from Once a Wolf by S.R. Swinburne. Hatred of wolves goes far back in history. As soon as people began raising livestock, wolves became the enemy and the symbol of savagery. In 5000 BC, the earliest farmers of Asia killed wolves to protect cattle, sheep, and other domestic animals. Aesop, a slave living in Greece in 600 BC, wrote many stories that painted the wolf as a cunning and greedy beast. The result was that in Eurasia, where wolves once ranged, they are now hardly ubiquitous. You are unlikely ever to run into wolves in Rome, whose founders, Romulus and Remus, as legend has it, owed their lives to their nurse, a mama wolf. Humans and wolves coexisted in relative harmony in Native America until 1492 or so. And as you can see, they're hardly ubiquitous now. In Farley Mowat's words, we have doomed the wolf, not for what it is, but for what we deliberately and mistakenly perceive it to be, the mythologized epitome of a savage and ruthless killer, which in reality is no more than a reflected image of ourselves. So the removal of wolves profoundly affected entire ecosystems, changing the behavior of other animals, having a negative effect on forests, and even affecting the course and health of rivers. As biologists and caretakers of Yellowstone discovered by the 1980s and 90s, that led to a highly controversial effort to reintroduce wolves to Yellowstone, which began in 1995. Despite a lot of political wrangling, the effort was successful. And since then, wildlife biologists have documented astonishing and far-reaching trophic cascades of improvement to the biosphere and environment at Yellowstone. And so this brings us to the part of the unit, bringing the wolf back, with anchor texts for read-alouds, including Once a Wolf by Stephen Swinburne, Face to Face with Wolves by the Brandenburgs, and Wolves by Seymour Simon. So we get back to the Little Red Riding Hood motif, a little girl and a wolf in the book called Journey. Now, this is based on a true story about the return of wolves to North America. A little girl hears a report about a wolf in Oregon heading south towards California. The story goes back and forth between the wolf and the child who follows its journey on the news. She tracks reported sightings on a map. She enters a contest to name the wolf. Journey, the name she submits, wins. The wolf now is famous, and its fame protects it. The girl and the wolf never meet. Their worlds do not intersect, but she is happy knowing she played a part in protecting the wolf by naming it and helping others to identify with it on its return to California. And of course, there would be many texts for students to read about wolves. You know, if you just Google wolves storybooks for children, you will find gazillions of these wonderfully written books for children to read and to write about, to discuss, and build language on. My vision of instruction for a curriculum like this includes serious, systematic work on reading and writing skill development, phonics, work on spelling patterns, derivational morphology, and on and on. But it also includes students working on story retelling, discussion, writing responses and reports about the topics they are studying, doing projects related to those topics, doing dramatization of stories, and so on. Teacher-directed instruction provides guidance and access to the materials, with read-alouds forming the basis for getting into complex and compelling texts that would be too difficult for students to read on their own. This is where they would introduce texts that students read on their own or in groups. And a daily teacher-directed whole class lesson focused on language. Now, the language of written discourse is sufficiently different from ordinary spoken language that all kids need help discovering how it works to communicate information and ideas in text. This is crucial for English learners and multilingual learners, but it is, in fact, helpful to everyone to learn about how language works. Teachers do that by focusing on a sentence or two, juicy sentences drawn from the read-aloud text that is being discussed that day. The sentences that are given this kind of close attention are ones that are complex by virtue of having a lot of information stuffed into them, this being a hallmark of such language, and which communicate important points made in the text. Now consider the excerpt I cited a few slides back from S.R. Swinburne's Once a Wolf that mentions the backstory of how wolves came to be seen as villains and wrongdoers of the worst kind way back. The sentence a teacher might choose for attention is the one that's highlighted, and I have here that text with a sentence that so you can see it. Now, why this highlighted sentence? This text addresses the historic origins of the wolf as a symbol of deceit and malice. The highlighted sentence links the folk tales that the class has been working on, in which wolves are depicted as villains. The sentence reveals that some of these tales go way back. How far back? The writer, Aesop, was living around 600 BC. BC. What does that mean? Now, here's a great place to mention notations for locating events in times past and present. BC, AD, BCE, CE for current era, and so on. So here's that sentence again for you to look at and to think about. Now, there is a dump truck load of information packed into this sentence. Preparation for discussing one like this is to deconstruct and unpack it. Reading the sentence aloud to the students with attention to punctuation would reveal, and prosody would reveal how you might support the chunking. The sentence itself is not terribly complex, just between you and me, syntactically speaking. There is an appositive clause that identifies Aesop and provides some information about him, as you can see. There's a verb complement clause that goes with wrote, and a preposition phrase that's a complement to that verb painted. The task begins by deciding how to divide up the sentence for discussion and work. Think about the sentence. How would you chunk it for discussion? And that's how preparation for work on a sentence like this begins. So I have done that and color-coded to show you how I might do it, okay? So how might a lesson like this go? Working with a sentence on chart paper or copied on a long strip of adding machine paper, which helps you the students to divide it up, by the way, by tearing it up and so on. You read the sentence aloud to students several times, and they get kids to consider how to chunk it for closer consideration. You know, there's a lot of information packed into the sentence. You can look at the words, you know, the subject, Aesop, who is that? And all of the noun phrases that go with it. What does the slave mean? Living in Greece, taking a thing apart, phrase by phrase. Many stories, now you can talk about the meanings of words like many stories. How is that? A few, one or two? How many? And also looking at what goes with what. What are those phrases saying? What does it mean to say something is one thing or another? And the meanings of these words. So there would be discussions on the connotative force of meanings of words. Cunning, greedy, beast. These words have a highly pejorative force. What does that say? Words can have more than one sense. Paint is a nice example of that. It can mean depict, put color on, portray, tell, recount, and so forth. One could demonstrate the use of online dictionaries with working with kids to figure out which meaning is the best fit for this word in context. Having children paraphrase parts of the sentence, explaining the information contained in the sentence, and then reconstructing the text after taking the sentence apart, putting it back together again. Ask the students to help reassemble the parts into the original again, with many writing activities that involve using phrases and words drawn from the sentence in the students' own sentences. Now, doing all of this is where many teachers could use guidance and support. There are some, but not many grammar nerds around. Many folks, including teachers, feel insecure talking about grammar. It's where teachers would regard some explicit how-to guidance as helpful. How about suggesting an especially juicy sentence from each day's text selection, along with a line of discussion to work on like the ones I just went through? Gabriela Uro at the Council for Great City Schools, in collaboration with Marianne Cucchiara, have created professional development materials to help teachers learn how to support academic language and literacy development across the curriculum. And I've provided a QR code for you to get more information about that. So how to access or create materials that are needed to support language and literacy content learning. The Knowledge Matters campaign has a review tool for evaluating English language arts materials, as does the English language support forum. Along the curricula listed on its website as meeting its criteria is the EL Educations, which provides support for teachers in conducting language dives, which are like the close encounters with segments of the text I have been talking about. Publishers planning to such guidance into their materials should know that this is not something you can just job out, give to some development factory for piecemeal unit writing, following outlines and specs. This takes guidance from a design team and from teamwork with content specialists and language and literacy educators. You could commission units from creative educators who know language. The educators you are looking for are ones who are themselves both well-educated and creative teachers and learners at the same time, and who have been successful in designing instruction that support language and literacy development for English learners and multilingual learners. They are hardly plentiful, but they exist, and you will know them by their language-rich curriculum, classrooms. My archetype for such an educator is Patricia Martone of New York City, a creative genius and educator whose work at PS 134 long ago in Manhattan gave me a glimpse at the learning that can occur when children are provided truly effective and inspired instruction. I have come across others over the years in my work, with Marianne Cucchiara, Lois Meyer of Albuquerque, Rebecca Bloom Martinez, also of Albuquerque, and Meredith Lieben, who are or know of other such creative language educators. Such talent has to be sought and treasured when found. And I'm going to show you a few photos that I took from the classroom long ago in New York that shows you what teachers who are inspired and know how to work with language can do with text. This is from a first grade classroom, by the way. And you will see that again, the teacher has color-coded phrases from the sentence to discuss, and the children have found sentences in those the text through those discussions to write on their own. Here's one that I've particularly nice. This in a unit on the rainforest. The sentence is, like most monkeys in the forest, the howler uses its tail like a hand to grasp things and to swing between the trees and the thick liana vines. And the sentences that the children found are listed under there. And here are some of the sentences that the children themselves wrote. This one I found particularly fun. This what child wrote, like most monkeys in the rainforest, the howler used its tail like a hand. And then he learned the word prehensile and he inserted it before the tail. Like most monkeys in the rainforest, the howler uses prehensile tail like a hand. And so I leave you with that to think about. Thank you.
That's amazing. Let's all feel free to show your gratitude and love for Dr. Fillmore. I see that the love is pouring in, and we all feel the same. This was incredibly inspirational, and we cannot thank you enough. And we see it in the comments, we see it in the reactions on screen. It gives me goosebumps. We are just so thrilled and honored to have you share this with us. And I want to go back into the classroom and teach that unit on wolves right away. Such a fun classroom. We do have a couple of questions that have come in, so I'd like to give you an opportunity to perhaps address some of these questions. And one that has come in from a listener says, Dr. Fillmore mentioned that text should not be written differently for any students. Could you please speak more to the specific needs of emerging bilinguals, and specifically those students who are brand new to English and here for under 12 months, materials for SIFE and SLIFE kids?
Okay, now I believe that children, see, the idea in many places, of course, there is English language development instruction, but including English learners in these sessions, in discussions of text. They can't read it, the newcomers can't read this text themselves, but what they're going to hear and what they're going to be involved in is language used in the classroom in ways that they will pick up. They will pick up materials from those exposures. But what's most important is this: they will be learning oral language from not only from this, but from all of their experiences in the classroom, the ESL lessons and so forth, but being included in these sessions in which they hear the language as it is used in instruction will enable them to start grasping the feel of the language as it is written as well. This is early exposure, and they will not necessarily get a great deal out of these experiences, but they will get something from them. And in fact, they will be learning, and they will be becoming immersed in the language of literacy early on.
Fantastic, absolutely. And this next question is perhaps springing off of that. Dr. Fillmore, do you think that metalinguistic knowledge and instruction is the silver bullet to improve academic outcomes for multilingual learners?
Yes, it's getting children to think about language, getting them to realize that this language that they are learning, has parts, and that the parts mean something, and these parts go together, all right? And how do you learn all of this? It's it takes place, I think, focusing on language and the idea that it's not just words that communicate ideas, but chunks of language. And they have different, that words can have different meanings and different uses in in various arrangements. That's really important. It's a key to understanding that it's not just naming things in learning a language. We're talking about newcomers here. Students, learners are not newcomers for very long, by the way. They're picking up the language. You may not realize how much children are learning, but they are, and the more you involve them in group language experiences, the more they will be picking up.
We have lots and lots of questions pouring in. So thank you for that insight. And also building off of that, can you speak to how metalinguistics combats deficit attitudes in teachers of multilingual learners? Maybe if you know an anecdote.
I do, but yeah, I'm not very good at thinking about anecdotes when I'm trying to focus on other things right now. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay, so here's an interesting question. What role do you think mathematics education might have in the world of knowledge building curricula?
It's essential, I think, to think about language across the curriculum. It's not just English language arts. It's not just the times when you're working on language per se, but mathematics instruction involves learning a different way of using language. And the more people think about the language demands in mathematics instruction, I think the more effective the language or the mathematics instruction will be. To realize, for example, that simple words like from and of and have different meanings in mathematics, from other kinds of use. Between, for example, to think about how all of these words, the special meanings that they take on in various math lessons, I think would be a crucial way to help children learn math and learn language, of course, but learn math more importantly.
Absolutely. Okay, I'm just trying to scan through and catch all of these questions that are coming in. Here's one. How could this work be adapted for high school or middle school age students? So often their content teachers tend to focus on the quantity of language. And this participant says she has a hard time getting them to buy into juicy sentences. So how can this be lifted up for high school and middle school students as well?
I think it's absolutely crucial, and especially since the language used in text for high school, middle school students is so much more complex. Any kind of written language, any kind of text you're going to find will have complexity built in. And to give students just a walkthrough in how you break things down, how you look for meaning of the chunks and what these chunks mean inserted in between parts of a sentence, for example. This is crucial to understanding and to understand why a writer would insert a phrase between two words in another phrase. This would give students a real insight into how to write and how to think about who they are writing for. Yeah. And so I think that this is even more important, actually, in helping students understand, to make sense of the text they are reading, the higher you go. It's interesting because, texts seem to be, are kept rather simple in the early grades. But then all of a sudden, they become complex. All bets are off once you reach middle school texts. Once you reach high school texts or adult texts, or they should be. And so, we find that students who sort of do okay up to the third grade, in the fourth grade, they take the nosedive because texts become real, they become complex, as they should. And I think that this is absolutely crucial, if we're going to help the students make that transition from learner text to learning from text in the higher grade.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay, another question here. Do you have some like talking points for someone who wants to respond to LEAs that want to emphasize more the explicit teaching of phonics and leave oral language development on the side?
I would have them take a look at, some of the materials from the Knowledge Matters campaign. There's a number of efforts to try to get people off the strictly skills approach. What are you learning the skills for? And I think that if there isn't something, if there isn't some knowledge, if there isn't something interesting to learn about, and the text kids are learning to read, there's not going to be much uptake. You can learn a skill and not use it. And in fact, I have met numerous students in schools who have learned enough phonics to actually sound things out, but they don't understand what they're reading. And so what's it all about?
Mhm. Here's a question that may connect from a participant who would like you to talk about the role of prosody in teaching children language.
I'm sorry about the.
The role of prosody in teaching
Ah.
children language.
Well, something, prosody, I think, is really important for helping, you learning to read a text. Using prosody will help students kind of parse the sentence in their ears, in their heads. And so learning to, for teachers, learning to do good dramatic readings, I think would be a real bonus for helping students to discover prosody, learning how to, I think that learning to recite poetry, learning to do parts and plays, you cannot just read a sentence without any kind of ups and downs, as it were. Learning how to use prosody would help, I think, students make sense of the text they read.
For sure. Thank you. Okay, here's one that invites you to talk a little bit more about your thoughts around thematic units where all subjects are integrated to maximize time and effort.
That would be so wonderful, because we know that in many, many places, because of the testing and so forth, for a long while, English language arts and math are the two subjects that are really given close attention, time, attention, love, and so forth. And so everything else gets neglected. And so thematic units, and here I'm talking about units that are not just kind of loosely linking materials, but rather big topics, ideas worth learning about, and having the integration as I learned all of this, by the way, from Lois Meyer and from Rebecca Bloom Martinez and people long ago who showed me the magic of linking learning packaging it up to make things interesting, not just for the students, but for the teachers too, for teachers to get excited about and to want to learn more about so they can make their instruction more meaningful, more useful. And there, everyone is learning and everyone is excited about learning. I think that's the magic of it all. And from New York, my goodness, working with the teachers and schools in New York, I learned so much, so much from the schools that emphasize this kind of rich, integrated instruction.
Yes, and this is connected. Another listener asked, can you please speak more about the idea that some folks believe that certain topics, themes, and big ideas in knowledge building curricula are not developmentally appropriate for younger students? How does one respond to that?
I would definitely consider the subject matter guidelines. What are the states, in your state, what are the guidelines for instruction? What topics are appropriate? I did, by the way, in looking at, in thinking about that Wolf unit, look at the guidelines, for curricula and found, that everything fit in. You don't talk about music, you don't talk about symphonic music there, but these things can be added. They just have to be developmentally appropriate to children's ability to understand things. And the magic of curricular design really is packaging up materials in such a way that you really give things a serious treatment. I really believe that children are capable of so much more than we give them credit for. And there is just so much to learn. There's so much to learn about the world and about how things work and what makes the world work. And children are inundated with things these days that don't necessarily take them to the places where they should be going developmentally. So I think that this is a matter of really, for educators, this is where the educator's art is to think about children, their developmental capacity to understand what it is that the world needs for them to do and to learn about while they're young and as they are growing.
I'm just smiling because I've seen this in action in classrooms where the kids are so on fire with learning about a topic. And like I saw in Boston, a first and second grade mixed classroom talking about symbiotic relationships in the animal kingdom, and those kids were on fire. So it was so exciting to see that and see this work come to life. Okay, so another question here says, hello, Lily. Oracy is so critical in both L1 and L2, but in particular at the middle school level, it seems to fall off the lessons for multilingual learners. So can you give some thoughts about Oracy and the science of reading through a wide angle view of literacy, please?
This is where it is so important for children to learn how to express themselves well. And we live in a society with many, many, many varieties of language, which need to be respected. Many different languages, many varieties of language. But as you grow up, and if you are going to participate in a wider world, there is such a need to learn the language of broad discourse. How do you learn it? You don't learn it just by thinking about it. You learn it by practicing it. And to have students read aloud you know, to learn to recite language, to learn to play act, to do all the things that used to be a part of growing up and learning to be a member of a literate society. You know, we have kind of lost sight of a lot of that kind of instruction. Things feel kind of desperate sometimes, but I think we need to be thinking really hard about getting back to what we we should be educating children for. And that is a world that is changing so rapidly. Yeah, they need to learn how to deal with the electronic world. They need to learn to deal with all of this gadgetry and so forth. But more than anything else, they also need to learn how to be a member of a society in which human relations means something, to learn how to talk to different people and in different under different circumstances. Yeah.
Absolutely. Okay, here's another one that kind of builds on the last question. Could you talk just a little bit more about learning vocabulary in action, vocabulary in context, which you were addressing there to some extent, as opposed to pre-teaching vocabulary?
Ah, yes. Uh-huh. See, this is when you find when you focus on parts of text, you know, when teachers work with materials like the materials I've been talking about, kids are going to encounter many words. You can't stop for every word, but highlighting ones that you will work on and in context, that's what counts. You know, treating words that take on special meaning when they're grouped together. Um, Thinking about the connotative force of words. Why would you choose one word over another? What is the force of this word in this environment? You know, and so I can't even think about, you know, okay, yeah, you could learn a whole lot of words in a list, but those are easily forgotten. Learning a word like prehensile to, you know, why would a first grader who is an English learner find that word prehensile useful? Well, it struck him as being very interesting because who could think, how would you describe a tail that works like a hand, huh? And so having a word to describe that ability tickled that little boy. So he learned how to write it and to insert it in his sentence. That to me is what learning is all about, you know? You know, it would be nice if we had prehensile brains so that every time we grasped a word, we could pull it in and it would be ours forever to use however. But you know,
Kids love those $1,000 words,
they
don't they?
do, they do.
Absolutely love them.
Symbiotic,
Well,
prehensile.
and I just flashed back to the famous butterfly video where those little kinders and they were using huge, gorgeous vocabulary.
Exactly, exactly.
To
And that video can be found, I think, on the Council of Great City Schools website because they got permission from New York, the New York Public Schools to include it in their materials.
That is still such a fantastic video and just highly recommended if people want to hunt that one down too. So I have a couple of more questions. I've got questions coming in on multiple channels here, but here's a one. Can you, because we have time for maybe one or two more questions. Okay. And so can you speak to a culturally sustaining literacy curriculum? Speak a little bit about that.
Culturally sustained, yes. You know, I think that the really important thing is for a curriculum to be inclusive. No, not, you can't include everything, but to represent materials from many different worlds, many different societies. You know, education, there is a place for a focus on your own culture. But on the other hand, there is a world that children are growing up in and who will be living in, which contains many different worlds, many different worldviews, many different experiences. And for them to just you can't cover everything in this world, but to give them a taste of the humanity that exists in
Mhm.
all different parts of society, and to be able to find the beauty and the joy and just the learning and interesting things to know about in many, many different worlds. That to me is the kind of culturally inclusive curriculum I would like to see. And, you know, it's, one knows it when one sees it, okay?
That's beautiful, and that's the kind of curriculum we would all want to teach, right?
Yeah,
For
the
sure,
one we would want to teach.
for
Thank you.
sure. Well, I think we have time for one last question here, and it's, why do you think there is so much misunderstanding in the field about how to teach literacy effectively to diverse students? I've heard some teachers, or this person has heard some teachers say that the mechanics of reading must come before content. So how would you respond?
Language has got to come before anything else, okay? If kids don't understand the language that the words that they're sounding out, you can match symbols to sounds that you can just barely hear, but they're not very useful. So it's all got to connect to the language, the spoken language. And the spoken language is absolutely foundational to it all, but it is different from written language. So there's another layer altogether that has to be brought to children and to be made real before all of the mechanical stuff makes any sense at all. See, this has to come early on in preschool, starting at the very earliest stages, getting children used to the sounds of spoken language first, which may be quite different from the written language that they're going to be dealing with ultimately. But giving them access to all of that orally first is foundational to those foundational skills. It makes no sense to teach children to sound things out that they can't make sense out of, okay? Because I could teach you to sound things out, say, in Yupik. Well, I can't really, but I could if theoretically speaking. And you would not understand. Well, you would have a hard time making out those sounds, first of all, but you wouldn't be able to make any sense out of it. So how is that reading? Huh?
Mm.
So yeah, there are steps. And first comes language, oral language. Then comes familiarity with how the different forms of language, how it sounds when it's written, and then how it's used to express ideas, that make sense to you because you could understand what is being said. You know, making all of that available to children, that's what literacy instruction really is all about.
I I just am almost left without words at how inspirational this session has been. Can we all show our just gratitude and appreciation to Dr. Fillmore one more time for the wisdom and the passion and the advocacy and the love that she has brought to this? I mean, just so full of admiration and affection and inspiration after today's session. So, Dr. Fillmore, thank you so much for being with us today.
I
It's-
want to thank Elsa for giving me this opportunity. I want to also say this is my last ever formal talk. I'm almost 90 years old. Will be 90 years old this year. And it's time for me to lay it all down and to start thinking about, clearing the cobwebs from my place. And I just want to say thank you all for participating in this. I can't tell you what it means to me. Thank you. And thank you so much, Deb. Thank you, Renee. Thank you, Layla. Thank you, all of you, for letting me, most of all, thank you, Elsa.
It's bittersweet. This is such a bittersweet moment and such an honor to be here with you today and just such a joy. Most of all, it's a joy. And I think about how many kids and teachers and content developers will benefit from what you shared today. So we thank you very, very much. We are truly grateful. Thank you.
Thank you.
I feel like I need to take a deep breath now because it's kind of an emotional moment, but a beautiful moment. So thank you. I guess at this point, shall we just move ahead to the next session? This is going to be an incredibly difficult act to follow, but we would like to invite all of you here to join us for the next session, which will be on May 7th. And as you can see, has an extraordinarily distinguished panel who's going to bring us fantastic information on the role of writing in literacy development. So it will be yet another really fantastic session. And we've added a fifth. I promised to share that with you. Be on the lookout because in early June, we'll be adding a session on biliteracy. So a really powerful session that will speak to the new report that ELSF is just publishing on bilingual and dual language work. And that's going to be a very exciting session as well. So please keep your eyes peeled for that one. And then finally, here it is. We promised you that if you would complete this survey, then you will receive links to all of the webinars in the series and also the materials and a copy of the slides that Dr. Fillmore shared with us today. So please be sure and do this. It would be very helpful for us in crafting future webinars. If you will complete the survey, let us know your thoughts, and then you will receive all of the information. So again, thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Thank you especially to Dr. Fillmore. We are truly grateful, and we wish you all a wonderful afternoon. So thank you.